Before we start the video, a large thank you to Luca, JDS, Little Dio, Key, Gabriel, and Nithrox for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And an immense thank you to Halo Burner and Sora Stratos for their continued support to the channel on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Hello everybody, and today we're going to make our fog wall. And apologies if I sound a bit weird this video. I lost my voice a while ago. It's just now starting to come back, so just in time for a new video. So I'm going to drag this over here into the entranceway and just kind of make it like about the same size here as the entrance. Don't need to be too particular. I'm going to be a little bit particular because that's how I am. Just going to make it, basically you want the height and the width of the entrance because this is going to be where the fog wall emanates from. So that looks good to me. Now you might not want it as thick as the entranceway. You might want it as thick. If you go to the gizmos here, the important thing is you see that box collider on the outside. We're going to use that as both a blocker in the future, but not in this video because that's going to require our interaction system, but as both a blocker and an emanator of the fog, and I'll show you how. So let's rename this the fog wall. And I'm going to basically create a particle system underneath this as a child game object. So let's go ahead and do that under effects. And the first thing you want to go towards down here in the drop menu is the shape. And let's make the shape a box. And then if we go here into the gizmo view, you can see this is the box. What you want to do is match the size of that collider. You can enter the values here manually, or you can click this little button and you can drag it out to match yourself. You can see here as I drag it out, the scale down there changes. So as long as you got the same dimensions as your box collider, you're good to go. And you can see here, there it is. And we change the settings here now so we can make this kind of fall. You can also change the emit from a volume or the size where you want. The rate over time will control how many particles are coming out, so I'm just going to crank that to 1,000. I'm going to do this very quickly, by the way, guys, because this is just for prototyping. Start and lifetime is, again, you can hover over these and read them. Duration is how long this is going to run for, but if we're looping it, it's going to be continuous, so we are looping it. Your gravitation effect here is going to affect how much gravity is applied to it. Your simulation space, want to set that to world. That's where the particles are simulated, so are they going to behave as if they're locally a child of a game object or as if they're in the world? I'm going to set that to world. I'm going to crank up the gravity modifier just a little bit so it looks like they're kind of dropping and falling. And I'm not going to go do too much more with this. We'll just we'll change a couple settings here on the start lifetime, and then we'll go and apply a different material. So you can take the time to make this look nice if you want, but for the sake of the series, for now at least, we'll make it look a little bit more simplistic, and we'll come back and address this later. Just going to change the size over time too, so it starts off large and gets smaller as it falls. And if I go right down to the bottom, you can pick one of these materials in your project. It does change the look pretty crazily. So I think there's one in here I use. Yeah, so it's a default particle system, but it's kind of like foggier and brighter. And now if we drop into the game here, that looks pretty all right. So we will come back and make this look a lot nicer in the future, but for the sake of prototyping, I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so what's next? Let's go to our scene here, the world scene specifically. And you see how we have a world AI manager. Let's create an empty game object. This is going to be the world object manager. And as the name suggests, it's going to do something similar to the world AI manager. It's going to just handle the management of the world objects. So think of things like sites of grace, fog walls, anything that's interactable really and might be a network object. So let's delete start and update functionality, drop in our namespace as is per tradition. And then we can essentially copy the logic here. So let's start by first setting up our singleton. But yeah, we can copy the logic here from our World AI Character Manager and apply it here. And to those of you asking why will we have a different manager then, it's just nice to keep these things separate because a lot of the functionality we'll use for characters later on won't apply to a lot of the network objects that have been spawned into the world. For example, with fog walls, we're not going to respawn them every time you rest at a site of grace, but characters we are going to respawn. So that's just one of many things that we'll be changing. So let's just, do our singleton thing here, and then we can actually drop on over. Actually, let's make some comments first before I do that. Let's decide what we're going to do here. So the first thing we need to do is create an object script that will hold all of the logic for the fog walls. So it's going to be called fog wall interactable. More on that in a bit. The second thing we're going to do is spawn in those fog walls as network objects during the start. So the reason why we need to create spawners for this is because you can't just spawn network objects by dragging them in the scene. You're going to have some problems if you do that. It's a lot of trouble. So much like we have done with our characters, the third point here is we're going to create a spawner or a network object or a general object spawner that will spawn these objects in when the game starts and when the scene loads in. And then 4 here, we're going to say when the fog walls are spawned, we want to add them to a list in the world that will be the totality of all the fog walls in the world. And then we're going to use that list to grab the appropriate fog walls from the list by their respective bosses. So basically each boss is going to own a couple fog walls, maybe even 3 or 4, depending on how many entrances you have and exits to the boss arena. And you want to grab those fog walls when the boss is spawned, and you want to use that or do that using an ID. And each boss is going to control its fog wall, so if it's been awakened, the fog wall is going to be active. If it's been awakened and defeated, the fog wall won't be present. And if it has not been defeated and has not been awakened, the fog wall also won't be present. So let's call this fog wall interactable, and let's put the fog wall as a child object of this. And I'm just going to call this script on top of fog wall interactable. Now the interactable part indicates that we can interact with this in some way, and we will be able to in the future when we pass through it, but we're not going to do that until we get to our interaction system, and it will derive from an interactable object. But for now, we're going to say using unity.net code, and we're going to derive this from a network behavior. So this will change in the future when we have our interactable system in place, but for now, let's keep it simple. So let's go and just grab any old bool from the character network manager and paste it. I'm going to use isActive because we can just keep the name exactly the same. This is going to determine whether the fog wall has its effects and colliders enabled. Next, let's make a serializable field here for a game object list or array called fog wall objects. I'm going to use an array because it's constant and never changing. And I'm going to make a header here and call this fog. All right, so let's call upon our on network spawn and let's make a private void for on is active changed. Going to use bool old status and bool new status. And all we're going to do is basically enable or disable every object we have inside that game object array, depending on the is active status. So if it is active, we want to go through every object in the array by using a for each loop and just say for each fog object in fog game objects, we're going to say fog object.setActive true. Otherwise, we are going to set them to false. So just copy the for each loop, replace true with false, and you're good to go. Okay, so let's go now to on network spawn. Let's override on network spawn. And then we're just going to simply say isActive.onValueChanged. And then we sync it up with our onIsActiveChanged. So plus equals onIsActiveChanged. Now remember, this only fires if it changes. So let's also call this on network despawn, and let's unsubscribe from this. Minus equals. So yeah, this is only called on when it changes. So if you join and it's already active but no change happens, you want to run this function anyway one time. So we're going to just call that function. You can call on is active changed. Now if you want, you can say if network manager.singleton.isNotServer run this, because you're only ever going to need to do this if you're not the host, but it doesn't make a difference. I'm just going to run it either way universally. So let's go under the fog header. Let's make a new header. I'm going to call this ID. And let's make a public int fogwall ID. And let's save that. All right, so that pretty much covers all the logic we're going to need for that script in this video. Let's drag in our fog wall game objects here. So I'm going to unparent the particle system just feel like it really. And drag in the fog wall here too. And on the fog wall for now, let's go here and let's actually, let's untick the box collider so we can walk through that. We don't need that for this video. We're going to be able to walk through that until we do our interaction system. So let's go to our prefabs folder and let's actually save this. And first I'm going to organize this folder because it's a bit unruly. So I'm going to add a couple new folders here. Okay, so let's add a couple new folders, drag everything where you want it to, where it makes sense to you. And then I'm going to drag in my fog wall interactable inside my interactable objects folder here and make a prefab for it. Alright, so I have to resize my particle system because I messed up the scaling when I unparented that. So I'm just going to reset it to 111 and that should be all fixed. Good to go. Now I'll resave my prefab. And you can see here it does this little thing where it just kind of doesn't, it starts up and dies and starts up again. So that's because the start lifetime should just be set to 1. If I put on a higher number, you can watch. This is 3. And then it goes again. So set that to 1 if you're having that issue and then restart. Okay, I'm going to save that to my prefabs again and that should be good to go now. So What's next? All right, let's jump over here. You can see we've made this first point here. So we have the script done for the fog wall. Now we need to spawn in those fog walls as network objects. So we can actually peep our other spawner script here, and it's under AI spawner here. So if we drag this into the scene, we can again reuse a lot of this logic. So let's drag this over here, and let's open up the AI character spawner, but let's also make a new script called network object spawner. So what we can do here is just mirror the logic we have on our AI character spawner, but instead of applying it to the world character manager, we can apply it to the world object manager. So let's just copy and paste everything in here, and we're just going to basically just simply rename some stuff, and that's about it. So let's go ahead, copy that, and we can close the script out, go back to the the network object spawner, and drop in our namespace and paste that inside there. So let's just do that. And what we're going to need to do now is change the header from character to object. I'm going to rename character game object to network game object. Instantiated game object can stay the same. That's a pretty neutral name, and it applies here. So let's change the world AI manager here to the world object manager. So before we do that though, let's jump over to the spawn character logic here on the world AI manager. Let's just copy everything here from that right to the top. We'll paste that in the world object manager, delete the update function because we don't need that, we already have that. And let's actually, again, just change around some stuff. So I'm going to say using unity.netcode, and I'm going to paste the spawn character here below the awake. Let's change the AI character spawners, change the variable type to network game object spawners, or network object spawner. Right click, change the name, network object spawners. And again, change the variable type. We can change spawn in characters to spawn in objects. Okay, and let's just grab this variable type here, paste that here, make it require a network object spawner. Again, change the name here where you see fit. And then we can change the spawn character name to spawn object or spawn network object, whatever you prefer. And let's jump back over now into the script. Oh, let's change characters here to objects. I'm sure I'm going to miss one or two things and have to rename it, but that's okay. Network objects. Let's actually make a header too here for fog walls while we're here. And we can make our list now. So you could make this serializable field and use a get and set and stuff, or just grab the fog wall from the list using a function. But I'm going to make mine public so it's easier. I'm going to make a public list of fog wall interactables, and I'm just going to call this fog walls. Okay, so we have our list of fog walls. We have a way to spawn an object. Let's jump back over now to the general spawner script. I'm going to say using Unity netcode, and I'm going to change world AI manager to world object manager.instance. And I can't do that for some reason. Oh, I forgot to make that public. Go back to your singleton if you haven't already made that public. You probably have. Let's jump back over to the spawner. And we're going to call spawn object instead now. There we go. Save that. Now let's jump back into the game. Let's remove the AI character spawner script. Let's just make a new prefab now for the object spawner. I'm going to remove the animator. I'm going to remove the model of the character. I'm actually going to replace the model of the character with a cube. And I'm going to give it a material that's very clear to me that indicates what this is doing. So it's just going to be a random, very bright red cube in my scene. And that will indicate to me that a network object is being spawned. Now, if you want to actually make individual spawner prefabs for all of your objects, so you can see a preview of them in the scene, that's cool too. I'm just going to use this generic cube for now. So I will drag this into here. You want to make it as an original prefab. If you do a prefab variant, you're going to see it just keeps those old scripts there like that. And I guess it doesn't really matter, but it looks a bit odd to me. So I'm going to unpack this prefab completely in the scene and make an original prefab like so. Okay, for some reason my prefabs have a position of not 0, 0, 0, so I'm just going to reset those real quick. Now I'm going to jump back into my fog wall interactable script here, and what we want to do now is actually add this fog wall to the list of our fog walls. Now how are we going to do that? Well, we could go here on network spawn, and we could say world object manager.instance. You know what, let's make a function for this, because in the future I'm going to do a little bit of logic as we're adding the fog walls to the list. Don't worry about it right now, because it's not needed right now, but we're just going to make the list so it's done in the future, and we don't have to come back and edit the code. So I'm going to make a public void add fog wall to list, and I'm going to make a public void remove fog wall from list. And this adds an extra step of security here too, because we can check to see if the fog wall is already there before we add it. So we're going to say if fog walls does not contain the fog wall you're trying to add. So let's make this require a fog wall interactable. Then we're going to go ahead and add it to the list. This makes it so you don't accidentally add double entries. And also on here, likewise, on the remove fog wall list, we're going to make sure that the fog wall is in fact in the list before we attempt to remove it. So just do the same thing, but in reverse down here, we're going to check if the fog wall list does contain this fog wall. And then instead of adding it, we're going to remove it. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this right here like so. Okay, cool. So we can save that now, and we have a way to add our fog walls to the network object list. We can say add fog wall to list and pass this fog wall. Now, if you want to too, you can go down to on despawn and remove it from the list like so. But honestly, I don't think you need to do that because whenever you leave the game, that's the only time these fog walls are going to be despawned. So let's save that. Let's go back in the scene. I'm going to drag my spawner prefab under the fog wall interactable, reset its transform so it's in the exact same position. Then I'm going to unparent it, and I'm going to just delete the fog wall interactable from the scene. And I'm going to make sure I get my prefab here and put it in the network game object variable. Now, make sure you're dragging it from the project and not from the scene, otherwise you'll get a missing game object like you see in my inspector right there. So make sure you're grabbing the variable again from the project and not from the scene. Okay, so what's next? So you want to go over here and again, make sure this is on assets and not scene. So just double click it like that. All right, so if I go into the game here now and test this, you can see, yep, I have a fog wall on the list and there is my fog wall in the game. So that is working as intended. The list has been populated and we're spawning it in. Cool. What's the next step? Well, I made a mistake here and I actually put true twice for enabling the fog wall objects. So mine was turning on even though it wasn't supposed to. Next, let's go over here into the AI character boss manager. There's something I want to try because I honestly don't know for sure how this is going to work. So if we go to on enable, I'm going to make a debug.log message called enable. And I'm going to make one on network spawn called, we'll just call this network spawn. I want to see which fires first. So if I go in the game here, it says enable fires first and then network spawn fires. Now, I'm pretty sure that's correct, but I also think that that's not always consistent. So I'm going to test this real quick just to be sure. I think that sometimes the other fires before, as in on network spawn will fire sometimes first. So the reason why I'm saying this is because what we could do is we could make an on enable method here, and we could add our fog wall to the list here on enable. But I didn't do this on Nephilim, and I think there was a reason why, so we're going to just quickly investigate it. Now, if we add that on enable, we can just simply get the fog wall here on network spawn. So we can make a comment here for locating our fog wall, like so. And if it doesn't work, no big deal. We can fix this very quickly and very simply. Just a rearrange of how we get things. So let's just write the logic for getting our fog wall anyway. So how are we going to get the fog wall? Well, there's two ways to do this. You can either use the boss ID and match that with the same ID as the fog wall, which is what I'm going to do. So for example, a boss with the ID of 2 will find fog walls with the IDs of 2. Okay, so that's the first way you could do it. The second way is you can make a localized variable here called a fog wall ID and match that with the fog wall's fog wall ID. So I'll show you both real quick. Let's make a serializable field for fog wall interactables. We're going to make this a fog wall list. So this will be every fog wall that the boss owns. I'm going to do a for each loop here. I'm going to say for each fog wall inside the world object manager, whoops, and this again, this should be a list up here, these fog walls. So let's make this a list. And we want to also initialize that list down here before we start our search. So let's initialize that list right before we do our for each loop by saying fog walls equals new list fog walls interactable. Okay. Now let's just say for each fog wall in the world object manager.instance.fogwalls, we want to say if that fog wall dot fog wall ID is equal to boss ID, we just simply add that fog wall to the list of fog walls that we have for this boss. That's it. That's method 1. So this method, you're sharing the same ID for the fog walls and for the bosses. Very simple. That's why I'm going to use it. It's super straightforward. You're probably only going to have like 3 to a dozen bosses in your game if you're an indie project. And if you're a bigger project, you're still probably going to have like 25 or 30 at most. I never see games with an incredible amount of bosses, so this is very simple. Method 2, equally as simple, but it requires another variable, so I'm not going to do it. You just use a fogwall ID variable here, and you match it with the fogwall ID variable from the list. So that's method 2. I'm going to delete method 2 because, again, I'm not going to use it. If you prefer method 2, definitely use it. Whatever is the most neatest to you, whatever makes the most sense to you, go for it. So I'm going to reorganize some stuff here. And before we do that, I'm going to start by making a new variable here for has been awakened. I'm going to say this is equal to world save game manager.instance.current character save data.boss is awakened, and we pass our boss ID. And I'm going to make that variable up here just right below boss has been defeated, serializable field bool, boss has been awakened. Okay, so we're going to get the defeated and awakened status first, and I'm going to move this thing here where it says if the boss has been defeated. Let's move that way down here after we get our fog walls. We're going to get the fog walls first, then we're going to check for awakened, then we're going to check for defeated in that order. So if the boss has been defeated, then is active is set to false. If has been awakened, then we're going to run some logic. What do we want to do if it's been awakened? We want to activate all of our fog walls only if it has not already been defeated. So what we can do here now is check. We can say if has been awakened. We can run a for loop on the list of all of our fog walls. And all we do is say fog walls I, and then we can just change the is active bool to true by saying is active.value is equal to true. Now we want to check this before we check for has been defeated. Because if it has been defeated, we're just going to, again, disable the fog walls, even if it already has been awakened. So what we're going to do is go up here now and keep the is active to false, and also copy and paste this is active for all the fog wall checks and change is active to false, and then move has been defeated below has been awakened. So our order of operations there is get the fog walls first, and then check if you've been awakened, and then check if you've been defeated. So I'm just going to make a comment here. If the boss has been awakened, enable the fog walls. If the boss has been defeated, disable the fog walls. And up top there, it's where we're locating our fog walls. Now, back to the problem that we're going to check momentarily. So we put another part of the function on enable, and another part where we get the fog walls on network spawn, because it showed that on enable ran first. But I'm going to run a test real quick to make sure that it's not changing, basically. So if I come into the game here now, we do have the fog wall, as you can see right here, and it fetches it good. But now if I restart, I'm just going to do this a couple of times. Let's just do it. We'll do it 3 to 4 to make sure. If I go into the game here now the second time, load into the scene, yes, we get the fog wall again. Okay. So we'll do it one more time just to be sure. I could just do a quick Google search. But we did not get the fog wall this time. Now, I probably just could have done a quick Google search to search that up for myself, but I do like testing things. So we know now that on network spawn is only sometimes called before on enable, or after on enable rather. So they're kind of interchangeable. So let's move our adding to the fog wall thing back to on network spawn. And we're just going to use a simple coroutine now to wait for the list to be populated before you grab it. So we can do that by making a private enumerator, and I'm just going to call this get fog walls from world object manager. And what we're going to do is just wait for the world object manager's list to be populated. So we can say while the world object manager.instance.fogwalls count is equal to 0. We know it hasn't been populated yet. We can just simply yield return new wait until next frame. So wait for end of frame. And this will just give it another second basically to let it get populated. And then once that it is populated, we can go ahead and run the logic here and just copy and paste the fog wall logic that we made up above and just paste it in here. And instead of right here, we're just going to say start coroutine, get fog wall from world object manager. So let's save that, and that should work every single time. Yep, we go into the scene here, and that is working a-okay. So we want to make sure we're basically disabling our fog wall at the start of the scene too, if it's not active. So let's go to the AI boss character manager, and let's make a quick debug header that we're going to delete eventually, but we're going to use this to test out functionality we're about to write here right now. So let's make a bool for wake boss up, initialize it at false. And then we're going to make a public void wake boss. This is actually going to be kept in the logic. We're going to use this in the final version. So all the logic in here will be used, but we're just going to run it now using this debugger just to test it, to verify this works. So let's go into where we have the death coroutine, and specifically where we're adding and removing things from the save file. Let's copy and paste that under wake boss here. So remove boss defeated and just keep the awakened only. And what we're going to do here is just basically keep everything here exactly the same. So if it is in the list, or does not contain the list, add it to the list, set it to true. If it's already in the list, remove it and then set it to true after you add it again. So on an update, let's just override our update, color base update. If wake boss up is equal to false, and then we're going to run this new function we just made. So this is just so we can test it in the game using the inspector by just clicking that bool and verifying this is going to work. So if I save that now and I jump into the project again, let's go over to our fog wall interactable, and let's go and make the default status of this bool set to false, not true. You're probably going to have to change that in your prefab too, and yes, I'm going to. But if I untick is active here, you can see it goes away. Now if I go to my boss and I wake the boss up, it should turn on, and no, it doesn't. I'm a fool. I didn't actually run the logic for the fog wall, so right here under wake boss, make a for loop again and iterate through each of your fog walls. And what you want to do is just turn them on. So fogwalls.count. And then what you want to do in here is say fogwalls i.isActive.value is equal to true. All right, let's save that. Now let's go back into our project. OnTick is active in the prefab. If I go to scene here now, load game, delete the character, let's make a new one, because it was awake before. Now we go in here, there's no fog wall. Good, working as intended. If I go to the boss, he has the fog wall. Yep, the fog wall's there. And if I wake him up, the fog wall becomes active. There we go, guys. So that's another crucial step done in this part of the process, the boss sequence. Now we're going to make this actually collide. Right now you can see I can walk around through it. But when we have the interaction system working, we're going to make it so when this fog wall enables, you're not going to be able to pass through it. You're going to have to interact with it to walk through it. And you're only going to be able to walk through it from one side. Furthermore, we're going to change a couple things in the future of the boss, like isAwake being a network variable, but we'll get to all that when we need to. We're going to keep it as simple as possible for as long as possible. So yeah, in the next video, we're actually going to work on giving this boss a trigger sequence, because I don't know if you noticed, but in games like Elden Ring and Dark Souls, when you walk in the boss room, if you just teleport in there next to the boss, you actually, in most circumstances, won't actually awake the boss, meaning he won't target you. He'll just stand there and you can kill him. That's why you see when some people do exploits, they get into the boss room without using the fog wall or the entrance, and then they're just free to hit the boss to death until it dies. So what we're going to do is make a little area when you walk in, or when you interact with the fog wall as well, where you'll trigger the awakening sequence. The boss will auto-target the first person who enters, and then the fight will proceed as normally. So in the next video, we're going to make that trigger sequence, and if we have time, we're also going to get started on giving our boss some states and attacks and some special functionality. When we get to that, I will provide animations I have for Dirk that were seen in the episode 0 of this series for my patrons. So again, you guys need whatever model and whatever animations though, but if you need some, I'll supply some in the description. As always, a special thank you to my patrons. It is because of you guys I get to keep doing this, and I love doing this, so thank you once again. And thank you for being here with me this weekend, and I will see you guys all next week.